Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the VSA SAT seminar. Today, I'm very happy to invite Mr. Paul, our VSA SAT teacher, to share his expertise on how the students can use a certain strategy to achieve the higher SAT score. As most people know, the VSA vision is to create the environment where the students can become strong writer and a bold speaker. Since I started in the field of education, I have always focused on the English writing skill as well as the presentation skill. Our students ranged from 4 years old to 17 years old. Because I have been working with such a wide range of the students, so I can see what skill younger kids need to carry them into the middle school and high school. On the other hand, because we have been helping students with the SAT and college counseling for the last 12 years, we can always visualize the skill students need when they head into the college. This truly helped me design the program and the classes for the students where they're still young. So today, we are going to give a brief introduction of the VSA program. Then Mr. Paul will talk about the SAT overview and emphasize today the verb session, given that Mr. Paul is the experienced AP history teacher and English teacher. So next, we will introduce our SAT one-on-one program, which we have been running over the last 12 years. At the end, we are happy to take any questions. So since the establishment of our center, we have always believed that when our students learn, they should enter into the active learning mode based on this learning pyramid. When the students listen to a lecture or watch the demo, actually they're in the traditional passive mode. Their retention is very low. However, if the students is actively join the group discussion, practice, especially taking the role as a teacher, that retention is much higher. So I want to emphasize that while teacher shares their experience, share their knowledge in the SAT class, the students must go home to practice to make the material their own. So only listen to the lecture, the retention remain very low. So my point is when the teacher handles the instruction extensively, students' practice is essential for understand the concept and internalize the knowledge. So VSA primarily teaches the reading and writing program from the pre-K to the 11th grade. We also have a math program and a public speaking program. Additionally, we provide online SAT, ACT, ISE, and SSAT classes. This summer, as a traditional of our summer program, we have the vocabulary program as well as the book club every Tuesday and Thursday from the 3rd grade up to the 10th grade. And same times, we are running the Scholastics workshop from the April to November. Because our long-term program, the well-designed, meets all the statewide test requirement, and you can see our students, even from the 3rd grade, and we have got multiple students achieved 100% on the NJSA New Jersey statewide test, and including the other statewide tests too. So this shows that our teaching strategy works from the younger grade up to the high school. So writing is our strong subject. This year alone, we have 107 winner and 5 national medal with the total of 227 winners over the last 5 years for the for the North American Scholastics writing competition. So people often ask, why do you have so many winners? I believe it's because we focus on the fundamentals. Even during the schematics workshop, we also teaching the important writing skills and help them to brainstorm, teach them how to use the graphical organizer and follow the writing process to ensure every single essay has a solid foundation and a clear theme. Our schematics workshop lasts 6 months, which I always said is a slow cook process for every great essay. So since we have been doing this program for the last 12 years, and we have been, many students get above the 1500, especially we often get 1550, 1570, or even 1590. But however, I must emphasize that the students spend a lot of time practice. As you know, we're in Livingston, New Jersey. This summer in Livingston, we're still focusing on writing. So we will host writing. So our summer camp has writing, vocabulary, and public speaking from the kindergarten up to the 6th grade level. So during the school year, from the September to June, our writing program covers the writing, reading, and comprehension, and writing. So I always feel students missing vocabulary. So that's why we use the summer, both in person in the camp as well as online, to enhance the vocabulary skills. Recently, as everybody knows, the rise of the AI, students use electronics, especially they barely read physical books. So this is why I started the book club last year, and I want to bring kids back to read actually hard copy of the books and enjoy to borrow the books from the library. So last summer, especially led our teacher from all different grades to spend almost 40 hours to collect 170 book list for students to read through the year. It's on our website. So in the summer, because the students need some academic program, even in the summer, so we are still running the summer evening program from July 6th to August 14th. Additionally, we're running in-person 2nd grade writing program as well as online high school writing program for 6 weeks. That's only exclusive for writing because I really think the high school kids need writing class during this summer so they can get more writing skill ready for their college application essay writing. So finally, the 4th semester enrollment already started. Welcome to visit our website. Paul, you're going to introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Paul. So I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about how to approach the SAT, some of the big picture things that you want to keep in mind, and then segue into some of the more specific things that you want to be focusing on when it comes to the verbal section of the test. So just a brief background, and you have some of it on the slides there. I've been a public high school teacher for about 23 years. I am an AP history teacher during the school day. I've taught AP US history, AP World, AP Gov, AP Euro. I, about 20 years ago, taught myself the SAT verbal section of the 2 or 3 tests ago, just so I could start working with more students, and it's kind of segued into something much bigger. So what I've actually done at my school is I've begun the process of actually creating an elective program where, as a history teacher, I'm teaching SAT verbal classes throughout the year. I run my school's SAT prep program for the verbal. I meet with kids before and after school and do more of a boot camp type of a program for kids that are trying to get a crash course on the test or trying to just review some of the things that they need to know as they go into the exam that they're about to take. Outside of that, I was my school's New Jersey Governor Educator of the Year last year. I have been chosen this year to go down to the New Jersey Department of Education, where I'm going to be rewriting the social studies standards for all students in New Jersey from grades K to 12. And then, in terms of my education, I do have a master's degree in education supervision. I have an NJ supervisor certification. I'm actually going through the process right now of also preparing for a principal's license as well, so I could do that if need be. All right, so when we look at this slide right here, just trying to hide my Zoom banner so I can see everything here. So if we look at this, we've had grade inflation is
Could
becoming
I
a
just
problem.
say something?
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
From the interaction with Mr. Paul, a lot of time we're in the middle of the night text each other to discuss the strategy how to improve the students' score. That's the most impressive to me. I just feel his mind always say, oh, what we can do to get better for these students, for that students. What are these students missing? What are students missing? So that's the most really things make me really so happy to work with you.
I'm not going to try to brag about myself, but I always have people ask me, if I've been teaching for 23 years, am I done learning? I'm never done learning. I'm always reading, I'm always researching, I'm always updating, always making sure that, for the SAT, there's so many different things out there that I'm not afraid to say I'll steal an idea or borrow an idea and kind of incorporate it into what I do if I think that it's going to work. It's whatever I can find and utilize to best help the kids that I teach in school or that I personally tutor to become the best version of themselves and get the best success possible. But it's always just kids should do it too, right? Constantly learning, constantly improving. It should be the same approach I think that educators should take. So this
Yeah,
slide right,
also,
oh yeah.
I know, I finally I realized you have been teaching AP history for many years. And so recently, Mr. Paul started teaching all my students as a AP history. Uh, the students' feedback was history in his brain is like a picture. It's like a great map. He knows everything. He doesn't have to read the books. He knows already. So that's very impressive for me. So okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, you're talking nicely about me. I won't stop you. So we see here on this slide, it's just talking a little bit about high school grade inflation. What you're going to see, what we're trying to talk about here is not just how you prepare for the test, but why the test is important to take. So part of it is that there's grade inflation. How do you measure grades? I've seen it as a 23-year veteran of education that school is different, education is different, grading is different than it was in the past. And one of the things that schools are going back to realizing is that the SAT, the ACTs, these types of standardized tests are the best way to really measure the academic growth and potential of the students. So going back to the COVID pandemic years, you saw that a lot of major schools and universities began the process of becoming test optional or not requiring test results at all. And that has kind of totally taken a 180 over the past couple of years. A lot of major colleges have begun the process of starting to reinstate the requirement to take the SAT and the ACT. You can see on the slide the list of the schools that are doing it. And I always say these are, schools that a lot of our students aim for. And it's a list that when you see some of these schools doing it, other schools usually follow suit. So them making that push to go back to test required is an important thing. I also tell every single kid, if you're going to a test optional school, there's a couple major things, three things that you can always look at with still taking the SAT. One, you're showing the school that you're challenging yourself. Two, you could possibly test out of some gen ed requirements as you show that you have the scores that could get you out of a gen ed English class, gen ed math class. And then the third thing is, I think parents like this the most is scholarship money. I worked with a girl that was a really good athlete. She's at Rutgers right now on a 50% athletic scholarship, but she got, I think, 35% academic. And they basically said the more that you give us a reason to give you money, the better you'll be. And one of the things that she could do was show that she was improving with her SAT score. So there's a lot of reasons why, even if it's not an SAT, ACT score required school, where you're still doing it is going to be the best thing for you. This just came out last week. This was, I believe, in the Washington Post or something along those lines. But it basically makes the argument how a lot of schools, again, are talking about the importance of the SAT as they start to measure the abilities of their students in college. And that's going to, I think, start to trickle down. We're just going to start to see more from the college level down to the high school level that this is something that's going to become more of a standard once again for education and for college admissions. So when we look at this stuff here, I'm just going to hide this Zoom banner for a second. Zoom panel. Zoom. Okay. So the SAT has actually increased in difficulty. I know it's not a thing that a lot of people usually like to share or think about, but it I always said at first that I thought it got easier when it went from the paper version to the digital version. It did get shorter. They did remove a lot of questions, but one thing that they did not change was the level of difficulty. It's just a different level of difficulty that this test has. So some of the major things that still show that, and it's even a test that's evolved since its rebirth as a digital format. One is the adaptive model pressure. Under the new adaptive design, you have to do well in model one in order to get the harder module two, which will be your gateway to getting a better score. If you don't do well in module one, and you're not going to get into the harder module two. And I tell you, for kids, it's not just getting into the harder module two with your module one score, but maximizing your ability to get minimal one or two wrong in order to really boost your score as you head into a much harder module two. There's advanced reading complexity. So the reading passages now feature a broader range of academic and literary genres, deeper synthesis of complex ideas, faster comprehension of nuanced authorial intent. So despite the fact that the passages went on the old paper test from 85 to 110 lines, they got shorter, but the difficulty and the strategy is still something that you have to know and do well. There's a lot of logic traps. I always say that one of the things that kids always have to keep in mind, it's not what's true to you, it's what was stated in the text. But a lot of those common logical fallacies are something that the SAT preys upon when it comes to the kids. And it's knowing those types of traps as you go throughout this whole process that will make you a better prepared student when you take that test. Standard English rigor. So grammar, punctuation questions, they are a large part of the test for a lot of kids. Grammar is one thing that they learned about in middle school, learned about in elementary school, and it's something that kind of I've seen many kids say that they don't do it that much. When you don't use it, you lose it. So to kind of rekindle the ideas and the knowledge that they have for something that's going to be a heavy tested portion of the test. And then you also have integrated time management. With more multi-step logic and structural questions, there is less time that you have to waste. I think on one of the slides we have the breakdown where it's 71 seconds per question. That's a quick amount of time when you think about it, especially when you have to do some reading, some in-depth reading, and also answer questions. And some of those answer choices are long. But one of the things that you can do is take a certain approach with how you answer questions to put yourself in the best possible position to maximize that time and how you're utilizing it. It's one of the skills we talk about in our individual lessons. All right, so the digital version of the test is now on an app. A lot of kids have it from their schools. I know the students at my high school, they have school issued Chromebooks that have the Blue Book app preloaded on it. If you don't have it, you can download it. That's the way that you're going to be taking it on test day. The Blue Book app also has 11 College Board issued tests. Julie and I were talking the other day, and one of the phrases that Julie used that I will now use forever is that Blue Book is the Bible. A lot of other test companies are out there making their own versions of tests, but when it comes to what the College Board is using and preparing and sharing, those are the ones that you want to make sure that you know, because that's the type of question and how they're going to ask it on test day. All right, so with the new streamlined test, you used to have 3+ hours on the paper version. It's now a 2+ hour test. The sections are shorter. There's fewer questions. There is less fatigue in terms of the mental fatigue, the physical fatigue as you sit there that Saturday morning taking that test. But despite the fact that it's going to be shorter sections, fewer questions, that does not mean that the test is easier. In fact, it sometimes can mean the exact opposite, where having fewer questions means that each question is worth more. There's less margin for error in terms of what you can get wrong. If you look at some of the old paper version test scores, you could get one question wrong on a reading and possibly still get a 400 out of 400 on the test score conversion. So you're not going to get a question wrong and still get a perfect score on this new digital version of the test. So fewer questions puts more onus on the student to do better. All right, what we also see is that while it is a standardized test and kids do take different tests in school throughout the year, it is different. And I always try to stress to students when we go through the process that you're using a lot of skills that you learned when you were a student, but you're also doing it in a very different way and utilizing it a different way. So if you look down the chart, you have the different versions between the high school test that a student might take and then the standardized test. Limited subject matter compared to years of material, content knowledge versus test strategy, having plenty of time or extra time, or saying, can I finish up to a teacher when the bell rings, as opposed to the rigorously timed SAT digital version where that clock is there and it turns red with 5 minutes left. And even if you hide it, it pops back up with 5 minutes remaining. And it's not going to allow you to have an extra 15, 20 seconds to finish your thought or complete the question after time has expired. High school tests, sometimes you get partial credit, extra credit. On the SAT, it's right or it's wrong. High school tests, human graded, the human element with that, as opposed to machine graded, you're taking that human element away. And then for high school test, one element of the overall grade. Schools that have a syllabus where it's a test being 40, 50% of their grade, there's other things you can rely on for a standardized test. This is your only score, and your final score will matter, and that's what they will see. So you use a lot of skills that you've developed and honed throughout your elementary, middle, and high school careers, but you're also using them in very different ways when it comes to the SAT. All right, so with the test being adaptive, it's one of the more unique things. It's also something that, at least in New Jersey, what I've seen with the new public tests that have been developed over the past year with NJSLA and NJGPA, there's a new A at the end, right? Adaptive is the new thing in education. So you have an adaptive test here. You have module 1 and module 2 for both the verbal and the math. The first module of each section is a mix of easy, medium, and difficult questions. And then depending on your performance on module 1, that's going to dictate what you get for module 2. You either go down to a lower module 2, that's going to be easier, or a higher module 2, that's going to be harder. College Board doesn't always do the best in terms of giving us information. It's up to people like us here at VSA to try to figure out where can we find where those scores will be. All right, they don't have it definite being we got to get 18 out of 27 questions or 19 out of 27. It can vary based on test. It can vary over a period of time. When I first started tutoring the digital SAT, it seemed like you could get 18 out of 27 right. It now seems maybe more of an average of 20 out of 27 correct, showing that once again, this test is getting a little bit harder as well. It doesn't adapt by question, it adapts by section. I know that if kids took the recent tests in school during the test windows for our state, I believe those do adapt based on how you're doing with questions. Kids were saying that some questions are being added in terms of the total that they had in my rooms or heard them talking about it. But on the SAT, it's based on module. All right, so if you see here, the first module is important. First module, you need to do well because you need to get into the second module, the difficult second module. That difficult second module is your ticket to getting a high-end score. If you do not get into that harder module 2 and you get the easier module 2 instead, you're going to find out that it's going to be easy. You're going to get a lot right, but there's going to be a capped ceiling of how well you can do. You're probably going to get no higher than a 570, 580, 590 range. It's easier, but as a result of that easier, it's also making it where you're not going to be able to compete for that high-end score. So again, my philosophy is always do not just well on module 1, do so well that 1, you're in harder module 2, and 2, you also are now maximizing that first module because you are going up in difficulty when you get into that harder module 2. They will not tell you, right? They never tell if you're in the easier or the harder. You can probably assume based on the questions, and one of the first things that you'll know is the vocabulary words that they start to give you are very tough right away in that harder module 2. So while you don't actually know, you can use a lot of logic and assumption to basically figure out you're in the harder second module. All right, one thing to remember is that the College Board determines which questions are easy, medium, and difficult. You go through different question banks, and sometimes it'll be labeled easy, medium, difficult. You go through the Blue Book app. When you look at the questions that you've completed for practice tests, it labels them as easy, medium, and difficult. They determine that, not you, right? I've seen kids where the hard ones are the easy ones are the hard ones, but they're the ones that are determining this stuff. So take that with a big grain of salt when you see it's easy, when it's medium, and it's difficult level questions. All right, so for the 3 steps of test prep, one of the things you want to do is you want to be taking as many practice tests as you can. You want to replicate real test conditions. You want to try to sit down and take the test in its entirety. Do both verbal sections, both math sections. Do it when a Saturday morning, a Sunday morning where you're up in the morning, a little bit more refreshed, not where I've had kids that told me that they did it when they were in study hall and it was loud, where they did it at 1 in the morning when they remember they had to do it. That's not really replicating the test conditions. That's not you getting your best read on what you can do. So that one sitting and having it in a quiet spot where you're going through and simulating the actual environment of the test is really important. Taking as many practice tests as you can is really important as well. And one of the things that we'll have later on the slideshow, but I can tell you is and testify to, we have access to a lot of unreleased College Board exams that we use. And again, using College Board material is always the best way to prepare. So you want to take a lot of practice tests. The more, the better. You review the results, right? You assess how you did with time. You assess anything that you felt in terms of fatigue. You look at the patterns that you are in terms of answering questions incorrectly. And listen, that's part of what I do too. All right. I sit down with my individual students. Every time they take a practice test, I ask them about their time management. I ask them how much time was left, if they felt rushed, was it the first module, the second module. I'm always I have a folder with a list of all the information. I track everything that my students are doing. So that way I know, are they struggling with punctuation questions? Is it going to be modifiers? Is it main idea? Is it function? Is it structure? Is it vocab? So that way I know where I can start to find the holes and then I can start to plug those holes. And then the last thing is we focus on those areas of improvement. We review the concepts. All right. My first goal is the first couple lessons. I give a quick overview of the entire test. I try to teach them the way that I think they should approach each question, what strategies they use, what deception you want to be aware of, what key things you want to do and not do. But as we go through the process, when I can find those holes, now I give them more additional material to practice and to prepare. I know that if you're doing punctuation questions poorly, we're going to practice a lot. And I have a lot of we have a lot of additional material that we can use to supplement. All right, for the best test dates, the big dates, they're usually March, May, August, October. August, October are big because that's usually going to be a lot of students that are junior going into senior year or now rising seniors, I guess, by August, that trying to get that one last test score before they start to go through the college admissions process. March is always a big day for a lot of the juniors that have been prepping throughout the year. Keep in mind the high number of test takers usually means that it's a more generous curve. Each mistake with a generous curve, meaning that you have more of an ability to maybe have a few more wrong and they're not going to be as punishing in terms of the scoring conversion that they're going to give you. We don't know how they do the scoring. All right, the questions are probably going to be based on level of difficulty that they've determined what kind of score you're going to get. Small test dates, June, September, November, December. They just added the September test as of last year. Lower number, usually lower number means a more rigorous curve, means that there might be a little less wiggle room. You're going to see that it's going to be a little bit more strict, a little less forgiving. If you get one or two questions wrong more than usual, you might see that have a little bit more of a negative impact on your score. Tried to take a couple examples of local universities that a lot of kids attend or strive to attend. So one being Rutgers, and if you look at this, you can just see that from the different schools that are offered within the Rutgers University Brunswick campus, you have the average SAT scores that are of the students that are attending. You can see that they're competitive scores. And then if you take that and then compare it to a place like Princeton, you can see where their English scores are instead, with that average being for the English section a 760. So you can see where the windows are of where you want to be and how competitive it is in terms of a lot of these students are out there pulling these types of scores. And you hear stories about kids that maybe had a little bit of a lower number, they got in. You hear about kids that had a higher number, they didn't get in. So, give yourself the best possible opportunity to show what you can do and your potential and your academic abilities with the prep that you can have for this. All right, so for the timing for the SAT, you have on the verbal section, 54 questions in total. It's 27 questions per module for a total of 32 minutes per module. So that roughly equates into 71 seconds per question. When we get into individual lessons, there are different ways that we can talk about utilizing test strategies, what questions you answer, what order you answer them, that will help you maximize that 71 seconds. Some will take longer than 71 seconds. The good thing is, understanding some of the ways that you can approach this test, you can shave a lot of time off of that 71 seconds for certain questions as well. I always think that's a big benefit because if you can answer a question in 20, 30 seconds, about 30 seconds you're putting onto one of those more difficult questions later on in the module. And then for math, you have 44 questions over 70 minutes. That's again spread out over the course of the two modules, which equates to 95.5 seconds. While it does seem quick, it is a lot. We could awkwardly sit here for 71 seconds and just look at the screen and understand just how much time that is. But it does go faster in your mind, especially when you're having to read and the contemplation of that clock always looming as you try to move through this test. Okay, so for the different SAT verbal sections, you have here the breakdown between the two modules. First and second look very identical. They are identical. You got 32 minutes. It's all multiple choice. You have one passage per question. So the nice thing is that if you don't really understand a passage and what it was saying, it's one and done. On the old test, it was reading for a while and then having 10 to 11 questions on one passage. So if you didn't understand it, it was a lot more of a struggle for many students. Within the 27 multiple choice questions, 25 are what we call operational, which means that those are the ones you're going to be scored with. And then 2 are pre-test questions where they're basically just gauging student ability. It's going to be where a question might be slightly different or they're kind of experimenting with a question. Those 2 pre-test questions don't count. So if you saw your raw score, it's going to be a score for the reading and writing section out of 50, not out of 54, because they take out those 2 pre-tests. You don't know which ones they are, though. So you're just taking it and trying your best, but without knowing which of those 2 are going to be the ones that actually do not count towards your overall scoring. So this is a pie chart that shows the 4 different verbal categories. If you've taken the SAT before or a PSAT before or a practice test, one of the things that you'll see if it's not a practice test on the blue book, but PSAT, SAT score results, they give you 7 bars. It's kind of frustrating because those 7 bars are these categories, and a lot of kids don't know how to read into that. It'll say that you had 3 out of 7. I don't know why they chose 7 bars. It's a weird number in my mind, but they will say, I got 6 out of 7 bars in standard English conventions, but they don't know what that means. I have 7 out of 7 bars on expression of ideas, but maybe you had 7 out of 7 bars, but you still had 1 question or 2 questions wrong within that domain, and you don't know what kind of question it was. So that's where you kind of have the ambiguity of the SAT and the score results. But these break down into these different categories that we're going to look at. So building the academic foundation for the SAT, it's a test of your intellectual abilities. You want to conquer the domains, you have to master certain building blocks. So we have the 4 domains right there. The grammar is the structural logic, the vocabulary. Vocab is a big part of this test. Knowing words, learning words, building that vocabulary base, and also knowing how to approach different words, even if you don't know what the word is. In a lot of instances, there's a way to still answer a question correctly, even if you don't know what the word is. For reading comprehension, knowing where to look, knowing how to look. One of the things I do with my students when we get into the reading comprehension for the first time is I talk about active reading strategies, how you can look for certain things in a passage, and it's going to give you a very good possibility of knowing what key textual information from the passage is the information that they're going to be asking about in the correct answer choice. And then you also have the writing and the expression, which is going to be the transitions and the student note section of the test. So for mastering standard English conventions, this is your grammar. All right. One of the worst things you do if you look at that first red arrow is to move beyond intuition. I always say that one of the worst things as an SAT teacher or tutor that I can hear is it just sounded good, because one of the things that they do is they, as the College Board, pry on those types of things. They will deceive you with your ears. You can't trust them all the time. You have to not just say it sounded right, you have to know why it was right. So that's mastering the rules of punctuation, semicolons, colons, dashes, non-essential clauses, modifiers. You have to identify the distractor patterns, right? A lot of this is patterns. It's my job to teach you the patterns, to show you the patterns, to make sure you understand the patterns. I had a student over the course of this past year that basically said it's like plug and play, which is the way to think about it. It's a different question every single time, but it's the same way that they're asking the question oftentimes. So if you understand how they ask it, how they try to trap you, all those patterns, those are important. And then the structural audit, approach every grammar question where we want to know what rule it is, right? It's identifying first. We'll see that when we go through the practice questions in a couple minutes, that it's what kind of question do I have for the grammar? And then based on what kind of question I've identified, it's now knowing what certain strategies do I now need to use. And sometimes you can do a scan of those four choices and immediately get rid of two right away. And now you have a 50-50. And if you have to then go through the process of making a guess, at least you're giving yourself the best educated guess possible, and putting yourself in a better position to get that question correct. Daily practice is important. It's not just meeting for our lessons and understanding what you did wrong and reviewing and asking questions. It's then going out on your own and doing more. For every 1 hour that I meet with a student, I tell them they should at least be doubling that on their own. So one of the things that students can do is go out and build vocab. All right, the 20-50 rule. Try to add 20 to 50 new vocab words a day. You can go to, there's different slide decks out there. If you go to places, I forget the name of the online tool where you can create your slides. I know everyone in my school uses them, but you can create the slides. You can have pre-made ones that for vocab. There's vocab lists, but learning words is important. Contextual encoding. All right, never memorize a word in isolation. You just want to memorize the word. Look at how it's being used. Think of how it's being used. So there's often times where we are using all those context clues like we've been taught for years with our reading skills and abilities. We need to be using that to make sure that we are figuring out how the word is being used in a sentence. For active retrieval, we can use the flashcards I talked about, digital apps. I always say to kids, just on a piece of paper, anytime you see a word that you don't know, go back when you're reviewing your test after we've reviewed it together. Go back and look at any reading passage, any vocab question from the vocab choices. Write down any word that you did not know and put your own synonym next to it. You are amazed. I'm not amazed anymore, but many kids are amazed how many times words will recycle themselves. So like I'm always saying, that's a good SAT word to know. That's a classic SAT word to know. One of the things I do after test day, I did it yesterday evening as I went on Reddit. I Googled or I searched on Reddit for the June 2026 SAT, and there's not a lot of specific questions on there, but one of the things that's always on there is the vocab. And it's unique to see what vocabs are new and what vocab words are ones that are being recycled. Like, oh, you should know that. They should know that. I'm always thinking that we talked about that. We talked about that. I taught them that. Because you start to see the recycled words that they're using again and again. For the writer's lens, one of the things that you can do to build up your ability is read. The more you read, the more likely you're going to do well in this test. It's not a must-have, but it's a definite benefit, and it's going to be a big plus. And don't just read anything. Read something that's high quality, high level. The Atlantic, the New Yorker, the New York Times, Washington Post, anything that's going to be a little bit more high level. Challenge you to read those words, scientific, academic journals, but seeing how those words are used and putting those skills to the test, and then daily review. Your vocab list should be a living document. Always go through it, always write it down, always study it. It's going to get in your head. And even if it gets you one word that you can eliminate or one word that you can confidently say that is an answer choice, then that living document with maybe 250, 300 words, it's paid off for itself if you can use even one of the words that were on there on an actual SAT. All right, in terms of the reading comprehension and analytical stamina, it's a test of logic, not just memory, right? So you just can't rely on just saying, all right, I memorized this information. You have to know how to also apply it to dissect complex arguments. Know what the author's intent is. Every passage is an argument. And this also goes with the type of question that you're identifying. How are they asking a question? What do I have to be looking for? What evidence are they going to be using? Deconstruct the logic where you see a shift in tone, counter argument, pivots to a new piece of information. That's some of that active reading. Evidence-based elimination. Never choose an answer just because it seems true. One of the things I always say is so important for kids is you need to have textual evidence. There is a reason why every single answer choice is the correct choice that it is. If you want to think about it, it's an open book test, right? You have the information right there. So you want to make sure that you're using something that can be backed up and backed up correctly. And then the passages are dense. So reading high level material, again, is going to force your brain to start to work and break down some of that more higher level stuff. So again, reading, high level things is going to really benefit you when it comes to this test. For the expression of ideas and rhetorical synthesis, it's not just about what they're saying, it's about how they're saying it. So for the transition questions, they're basically logic questions, right? You have three relationships for the transition questions. Is it going to be continuation, contrasting, cause and effect? For the rhetorical goal check, when asked to synthesize notes, one of the things that we'll see is that you don't really have to look at the notes all the time. Just knowing what was the person trying to do and breaking down the way to look at the question, but it's not going to be the one that has the most information. It's the one that's answering the question that's being asked. You want to master the contextual flow. I always say to think not like just like an editor, but think about the like you're the test maker as opposed to the test taker. All right. How are they asking questions? How do they set those questions up? When you can start to think in that nuanced way, that's when you really kind of understand how they're asking questions and also how you should be answering them. And then you also eliminate irrelevance, anything that is true to you, but irrelevant to the question, or was read or discussed, but not part of the question. We get rid of that. That's one of those classic supporting detail temptation type question choices where we want to go with it, but it's not something that actually answers the question correctly. All right, so again, we go back to our pie chart here with those four domains. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of break those domains down. So you have the first one being craft and structure. So for craft and structure, you have that being almost 28% of your test, so the largest. And it has specific types of questions, words and context, that's your vocab. As text structure and purpose questions, that's where you have structure, main idea, or sorry, not main idea, structure, function, or purpose questions. And then cross-text connections, that's where you're having text one and text two. You have to figure out how they're playing off of each other. So one of the more challenging questions for most students ends up being the vocab questions. So we're going to go through and kind of talk about how we should approach those in a very kind of quick but important way. So one of the first things that you always need to make sure that you do is when you see a question, the first thing you're always going to hear me say is you read the question first. You have to identify what kind of question it is. And once you identify what kind of question it is, what you're now doing is you know how to answer that question. All right, so I don't start reading. I don't start looking at the answer choices. I read the question first. When it says complete the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase, I know that I have a vocab question on my hands. So one of the things I do next is I then read the text. And as I read the text, there's certain key things that I'm looking for as I go through. That's part of that active reading strategy that we work on in lessons. If I look at this one, I'm also going through and I'm trying to be very strategic. What I want to basically do is come up with my own word or phrase that I'm plugging that blank in for the vocab. And I'm going to take that word or phrase that I came up with. I'm going to try to compare it to the choices down below and find out which choice is most synonymous. Don't just start shoving the words in. And one of the things you're going to see is that they'll use secondary meanings where it's a word that has two or three or four different meanings that maybe kids have never even heard of before. Um, but one of the things I also try to do is basically just use what they're giving me as much as I can. I'm looking to replace words or phrases in that blank with words that they already used or phrases that they already used. So, for example, for this one right here, former astronaut Ellen Ochoa says that although she doesn't have a definite idea when it might happen, she blanked that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth. This conjecture informs her interest in future research missions to the moon. So I got two things there. I've got she doesn't have a definite idea. I've got conjecture, and I'm trying to think that I would say that that's one of the choices that I'm going to try to come up with in my head. She's not definitive. She doesn't know for sure. She thinks, she believes, but she's not positive. And if I think of that on word or phrase and then I match it up, it's going to be the word speculates. But what I want to do is always do the steps. And I always reinforce that with the kids. If you go through the steps, you're more likely to get it right. I worked with a kid from my school a couple years ago. He's now at Purdue, insanely smart student. He would always get these types of questions wrong. And he admitted it's because he thought they were easy and he just tried to answer the question without going through the steps. And when he finally started to stop that autopilot mode that he said he kind of had his brain going into and would do the steps every single time, he got an 800. right? He's at Purdue doing something, I forget what, but it's crazy awesome, and he's gonna, I think, save humanity at one point in his life. But he got the 800 because he finally decided to start using all these steps every single time. So we look at this one. Now, this one's going to be a little bit harder. If I look at those words, which I shouldn't be doing first, but if we look, choral, paucity, perfusion, verisimilitude, there's a little bit more higher level vocab there. I still take the same approach. I try to read and then come up with a word that's going to be the closest in meaning for what they're saying within that text. So new and interesting research conducted by Suleiman Sweden and Moth Al-Haj is inspired by their observation that though there have been many studies of the effect of high altitude on blood chemistry, there's a blank studies of the effect on blood chemistry of living in locations below sea level. So if I think my key word there is the contrasting word, though there have been many studies, because now I have a contrasting relationship. So what I'm looking for is something that will be the opposite of many studies. So I'm just thinking in my head, not a lot, or lacking, or few. And now I start to go through those choices there. Quarrel means to argue. That's going to be wrong. Paucity. A lot of people probably know what paucity is. That's going to be your correct answer. Profusion. Pro is a prefix, Latin word that means an increase of something. And then verisimilitude is another word that a lot of kids might not know. But one of the things that we work on is not just if you know the word or don't know the word, it's how can you start to break those words down. So when I see that word pro, which means an increase in something, that's the opposite of what I'm looking for. That's the antonym, not the synonym, what I'm trying to come up with here. For the word verisimilitude, verisimilitude has a Latin root word of ver. All right, the Latin root words, all the languages have those bases where they all basically mean the same thing. Ver, if you take a Spanish class, verdad means the truth. So verisimilitude is an aspect of truth. If you know the word ben as a Latin root word, benefit, benefactor, benevolence, benign, ben means good. So knowing those Latin root words is one of the things that you could also do. And I don't make kids memorize every single last Latin root word out there, but knowing some of the more frequent ones that'll pop up, and it's going to be, if you don't have the ability to answer it with your initial reaction, it's having a bunch of extra tools in the toolbox where you can say, well, I can use choice B, C, or D to go and figure out what this answer choice is going to be. And one of the things that we do just to show you here is we teach the words, all right, what they mean, how they mean. So if you look here from a slide deck that we use at VSA, you have the word paucity, you have the definition, you have the example sentence, so you're seeing how it's being used. But you also see how you break it down. The root word pos means paucus, Latin for few, right? Lacking, not a lot of something. You sometimes say, well, if you like paucity, a pauper, or a person that's lacking in money, different ways you can make an association with these words and get it right. All right, for text, structure, and purpose questions. So here's another type of question that you're going to see in that first section of the test. So for this one, when I do the first thing, which is to read the question, which choice best describes the function of the underlying sentence, I now know that I have a function question. And when I know I have a function question, my mind immediately starts to think, what do I do? What do I not do? And I always tell kids one of the things that you can do is if the function of the passage is in the middle, that sentence is in the middle, one of the things I want to think is how does it connect to what came before and what came after? And keeping the before after thing is really important for that. So if I read this real fast, not to bore you guys, but Lily had no real intimacy with nature, but she had a passion for the appropriate and could be keenly sensitive to a scene which was the fitting background of her own sensations. Now, in that first sentence, I also have two things for my active reading. Contrasting word or phrase is important, emphasis words are important. But she had a passion, could be keenly, very sensitive, very aware of a scene. The landscape outspread below her seemed an enlargement of her present mood, and she found something of herself in its calmness, its breath, its long free reaches. On the nearer slopes, the sugar maples waver like pyrus of light. Lower down is a massing of great orchards. Here and there, the lingering green of an oak grove. So if I'm thinking, why is that sentence there? That's what a function question is asking me to do. Not to restate it, not to just put it in my own words, but why is it there? I'm thinking this top arrow here. It's building off of what they just said in the sentence before. And just by doing that little thing, you can get a lot of function questions correct. So what I would want to do here is I'm thinking as I predict an answer choice, if I can do that, is I now go through and I'm looking, all right, where did it play off of what came before? So A, it creates a detailed image of the physical setting. This is classic SAT deception because that last sentence down in the bottom of the passage, that was the detailed image of the setting. That's not the function of the underlying portion. Not even underlined there. B, it establishes that characters experience an internal conflict. If I use my textual evidence, there's no internal conflict. It says that the person has calmness. C, it makes an assertion that the next sentence then expands on. Well, it's not what was coming after, it's what was coming before. And look at D, it illustrates an idea that is introduced in the previous sentence. So just by thinking about that before and after relationship, I can start to narrow down pretty quickly the choices of what I'm looking for. And one of the things you'll always see is you never have to have in-depth knowledge about these passages. You don't need to know about the science. You don't need to know about the whatever it might be, the background knowledge. It's just using what they're giving you and using it in as basic of a way as possible and ignoring a lot of the deception with that niche wording and high level terminology. All right, second domain, central ideas and details. So this one right here, this is a question that would be a claim question. So first thing I do, I read the question. Which question from to you most effectively illustrates the claim? So when I see this, I'm always thinking two things. I have to find a claim. I have to know the relationship, which in this instance is illustrating it. So when I read through the text, I have to be thinking what the claim is. To use an 1856 poem by Walt Whitman. In the poem, Whitman suggests that readers, whom he addresses directly, have not fully understood themselves, writing blank. So what would be the claim? The claim is that the readers have not fully understood themselves. So now I'm thinking, all right, they don't understand themselves. Let me run that through and let me look now that I identified some of that key stuff with the choices that I have. And this might be hard for some because you're going from the wording of an 1856 poem. The further back in time that you go, the harder it is because the vernacular of how they write it then is much different than how they would write or speak now. I'm currently teaching at my school. He's a senior. He's going to Princeton next year. He's maybe the smartest kid I ever took, or had the pleasure of teaching. And he took AP Lang this year, and he told me when we were talking about his classes that he can't do Shakespeare. He goes, Shakespeare is his Achilles heel. And they put some Shakespeare on here, right? It's hard, some of the wording and some of the vernacular. But what would show that the readers have not fully understood themselves? So if you look at the choices, A, you have not known what you are. You have slumbered upon yourself all your life. Your eyelids have been the same as closed. You, the reader, slumbered. You slept on yourself. Your eyes have been closed. You haven't really understood yourself. If you read through the other choices, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense. But it's going back to I know what the claim is because I identified the claim. And now I'm trying to find the evidence that would best support that idea. And again, you do the same thing every single time you see a claim question. What's the claim? What's the relationship? Now let me see what matches up best with that claim. For inference questions. So inference questions are going to be some of the harder questions that you'll see. One of the biggest things is that they're going to give you a lot of terminology that deals with some high-end science stuff. But I want to start by reading the question first. Which choice most logically completes the text? So when I read the text, it's going to be a lot of science stuff. I'm trying to think more about what was being said in the connection as opposed to what it really means. So herbivorous sauropod dinosaurs could grow more than 100 feet long and weigh up to 8 tons, 80 tons. And some researchers have attributed the evolution of sauropods to such massive sizes to increase plant production resulting from high levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide during the Mesozoic era. It's all one sentence. It's really long, right? But there's ways that if I'm sitting here doing this, one of the first things as I read through a complete the text inference question, I'm taking little notes, and I'll show you what I did in just a second, but let's continue on. However, contrasting words are important. There's no evidence of significant spikes in carbon dioxide levels coinciding with relevant periods in sauropod evolution, such as when the first large sauropods appeared, when several sauropod lineages underwent further evolution towards gigantism, or when sauropods reached their maximum known sizes. So what would that suggest? What would that lack of the carbon dioxide when they're getting bigger mean? So they gave you a lot of scientific wording there. I want to keep it basic. So I have even within that, those are my key parts. I highlighted the however because those are important as well. I'm taking little notes as I go. And when you take the notes, you get scrap paper. You can do a text box with some of the tools that they offer for you. I'm not writing that big stuff. This is basically what I would put on my notes. More CO2, more carbon dioxide led to more plants, which led to bigger dinos. Dinos got bigger because there was more plants to eat. There was more plants to eat because there's more CO2. And then they gave us that however, which means you're going the opposite direction. There's not more CO2 when the dinos got bigger. So what they say, what does that mean? So to me, my prediction is dinos got bigger for reasons other than CO2. There was no role that CO2 was playing in dinosaurs getting bigger. I took all that scientific stuff and I just made it very simple and straightforward. Even when I write it on the notes on the screen or on a board for my kids at school, I even use arrows, up, arrow down, just whatever. They're not going to check your notes and see like, oh, did this person write full sentences and look, whatever makes it easiest for you where you're just getting through it, but understanding what they're saying. If I take that idea and now I apply of that answer, what I'm going to find is that it's going to be answer choice B. The evolution of larger body sizes in sauropods did not depend on increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. There was something other than the CO2 that was causing them to get big. So just knowing how to break these passages down and knowing what to look for, and that's what we do again and again and again. I tell you what to look for, I tell you how to look for it, and then we practice, 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 and review. All right, third section of the test, standard English conventions. But most kids probably don't even know what that means. But that basically means you have grammar. And I love teaching grammar on the SAT because it's easy. Right. The old SAT, there was about 15, 16 different types of questions. They narrowed it down to about 7 or 8 types of questions for grammar. And once you can master the basics and then you start to see the little variations, it just becomes a pattern of again and again and again. I always say a really good sign of students progressing nicely when I work with them is by the end, we don't even really talk about grammar that much because they got it right. It's easy to understand, but I always love if a kid has a problem on the test when they say it's grammar. I'm like, oh, easy to add those points. This is like the easiest place to do it. And this is where I actually say you should be doing these questions first because they're easy. Get the easy ones out of the way first and quickly and maximize your score with it. So, couple things here. So, this is also a very gameable portion of the test, right? There's certain things that we can be looking for, and we know what to do. It's all about knowing what kind of question that they're asking. Because when you have a grammar question, it's always asking the same thing. What conforms to the conventions of standard English? So, we want to look at the 4 choices and do what I call a vertical scan. And just by doing that vertical scan, I know that I have a subject verb question. And when I have a subject verb question, I always use this really good cheat. I call it the he, they test. I look at each word and I basically think what I say he have or they have. So I would say they have for A, they are for B, he was for C, they are for D. So A, B, and D are plural, C is singular. And I take the one choice that is going to be different than the others, and that's going to be answer choice C. Notice what I didn't do. I didn't read the passage. You don't have to, for certain questions, you don't have to read the passage. You can start eliminating questions in this section of the test just by knowing what rules are being asked about and knowing what little cheats you can utilize here. I did the experiment and it proved my case more than ever with the subject verb question where I had the kids in my class at school. It was one of the lower SAT level groups that I teach. And we got the subject verb agreement question correct with the cheat, with the he they test, as I call it. And then I said, all right, tell me what the subject is that was being used to conjugate that verb. I think collectively as a class, it took them 12 or 13 guesses to find the word. It proved my point. The SAT is really good at hiding that subject in the passage. But if I just know that I can use that he, they test sheet, I'm going to get it right every single time. And I can do that in less than 10 seconds. Now that's 61 seconds of that 71 seconds for that question that's added on to another harder question later on in the test for me. All right, for this type of question, I do my scan. I see that I've got the punctuation questions being added. There's certain rules. There's about 5 different types of punctuation questions on this test that we go through. I'm not going to go through them all tonight, but what I can figure out is when I do my vertical scan, knowing that there's certain things that I can eliminate right away, just by knowing that I have 2 words that are the same on either side, and knowing that a semicolon in B and a period in C, the period, the semicolon, and also what's called a fanboy's conjunction on the SAT, all are used the same way. So if there's the same words and one's a period, one's a semicolon, they cancel out, which I love because now that means before I've even started to read the passage, I know that I can get rid of B and C. I've got a 50-50 chance I didn't even start reading it. And then what I do is I use this cheat for kids, this strategy called the vertical line test, where if you draw a vertical line and pretend like you're stopping the sentence where they're putting the punctuation marks or removing the punctuation marks and figuring out is it a dependent or independent clause, all things we'll talk about, and you could understand much better. What you're able to do is basically have a little chart that tells you when you're going to use a period, when you're going to use a comma, when you're going to use a colon, when you're going to use nothing. So knowing that I have two dependent clauses at this spot between added and whenever, that lets me know that I would be using no punctuation, and that's my answer choice would be D. So a lot of identify the question, able to eliminate certain things. It's a very gameable portion of the test. Another part with punctuation where I can show you again how I can eliminate two right away. One of the rules of grammar on this test is if I have a description followed by the subject, I never put punctuation between it. So when I do my vertical scan, when I know I have conventions of standard English, and what kind of question do I have? Oh, it's punctuation, but oh, what do I notice? Critic is the description. Stina Chin is the subject. I can't have a comma or a punctuation mark between them. So that means that being A and B are gone. And now what I'm doing is I'm doing that vertical line that I mentioned earlier for C and D. And I notice that I have two dependents. And then I also have the incorrect usage of what's called a non-essential clause, which again, we go through and we talk about all the different rules for punctuation. But I know that from C or D, that my correct answer has to be answer choice C. So again, it's knowing the patterns, knowing how to use these little tricks and strategies to eliminate things right away, and then giving yourself the best possible chance from there to get it correct. Misplaced modifiers, right? These are ones where a lot of kids use their ears and your ears will deceive you on this. So the modifier used to be on the old paper test, like one every 2 or 3 tests, you'd see a modifier. Now it's probably one per test with the new digital SAT. So my clues are when I do my vertical scan, when I see really long answer choices, and usually they're even longer than the ones that I put on this slide, but long answer choices and having a verb or verb phrase at the beginning. I've got my long answer choices here. I've got upon recovering. There's my verb phrase. So what was doing the recovering? That's what I have to be thinking. Would it be Henry? Would it be the rain? Would it be Henry's rain, which is basically B and C saying the same thing, or it, where almost every single time I'm going to get rid of the pronoun. So what was doing the recovered? Who recovered 2 years later? It would be Henry that recovered 2 years later. So again, just knowing the modifiers, again, hard, not always easy to understand, sometimes tricky with our ears, but once you know what you're looking for, it becomes really, really simple to answer correctly. And then for the last part of the test, the expression of ideas, it's 20%, it's the smallest. Two things here. You get transitions, you get rhetorical synthesis. Again, another part of the test where we have classic SAT deception. For about 80% of the student note questions, you don't have to read the text. You just want to go and focus on that first sentence of the question and look for what would answer it. The student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two books Kimmerer wrote. So where do I see a similarity with two books? And if I go through and look at my choices, I'm easily able to answer A, and I didn't even have to read the bulleted notes. Now, SAT has kind of figured that this was a gimmick that a lot of people were tutoring kids on and going into the test room with. It still can be used. It's not used as much as the first couple tests, I think, especially in the harder module too. There are times you'll have to read the bulleted notes. But if we don't have to read the bulleted notes, we still try to see if we can answer it first because it's still able to be done a large amount of the time just by knowing, look at the first sentence, what is it asking, and now looking how those answer choices can best answer that question, not even using those notes. Saved a lot of time with that, saved ourselves from trying to sift through a lot of information that we don't have to worry about trying to put to memory. All right, so for our strategies for SAT success, a couple of things here. One, we want to prioritize question first. All right, we always find out what the question is because we always will know what strategies we need to use. We want to master the domains, and we want to know not just the domains, but know what kind of questions are within the domains. And then knowing within those domains where you might be struggling, we can focus on those types of questions. Want to be active with the note taking. All right. While you're reading, jot down keywords, the author's claim, the logical flow. They give you scrap paper, they give you the chance to do that. I would say also be taking notes when you're taking a class, right? Be jotting stuff down, not just listening, but writing things down that you can go back and you can review. Adopt a defense mentality, right? Sometimes it's not looking for what answer is correct, it's looking for what answer is wrong. We're always using textual evidence for that, right? So we can still say, well, they didn't say this, that's wrong. They said the opposite of that, that's wrong. And I can still go through the process of elimination. Sometimes the right one isn't the one that sounds the best, but the other ones just sound, or not just sound, I should say, but just are based on the evidence being presented, a lot more wrong. Then we want to target grammar traps. All right, so knowing some of the things where we have differences in punctuation or verb tense, that's going to be important. So we do build up a lot of that grammar base in addition to the strategies that we can use. We want to simulate the environment when we're practicing, which means even actually using some of the digital tests that are out there, knowing how to use, if you're a math person or from the math section, using the decimals calculator, how to use the highlighter tools, the text box tools, seeing how you take that test. Because if you're doing it on paper, you're seeing the questions, but it's going to be different than on test day. Conduct error analysis reviews where you go through like you should take a practice test. We meet and we talk about it, and then you should go back and you should review it. So you should be going over that test again after we're done and studying. And that should be the first step before you, I always say for the next lesson, I'm going to give you another homework test. So you're going to review the test you completed. I'm going to give you some work to do to practice some of those questions that you got wrong. And then you take your next practice test. That's where you start to see the improvement. You want to build your inner strength. So knowing about the foundation of academic English, doing it consistently, doing it daily, is going to build up that stamina to make these passages easier to get through. Strategic pacing. So the more you practice something, the pacings can become a lot easier to manage. And then consistent execution. It's an endurance test. You can't do it at the end. Like, can kids get some improvement? Maybe, but it's better if you take the time. And listen, the summer is the best time to do it. School years are so busy for so many people with academics, with extracurriculars, with sports. I know it. I teach AP classes. I do the AP reading for the College Board. I'm in the middle of doing that this week, where I think I've read about 450 of the same DBQ over the course of like 40 or 50 hours for the week. I coach softball, I coach soccer. I have 3 children that are involved in different sports. I coach some of their teams. I'm doing different meetings at school, running different clubs that I'm involved in with extracurriculars. So the summer is a nice time where you can take that breath, but still utilize that time where you can study for a test that you have the August, you have the September, it's right there. So take advantage of that time where you have a little bit less on your plate and maximize it. But doing it consistently, 2, 3 meetings a week over the course of 8 weeks is going to really benefit you as opposed to just trying to get 7 lessons in the last week. So our execution process, analyze questions, extract the data, you eliminate anything that's going to be incorrect. And then I always say just go back and confirm it. Plug your answer choice in, make sure that it does in fact make sense and it is the correct one. And then for our one-to-one program, when we're working one-to-one, and why I think one-to-one is such a great opportunity for kids, we have a precision gap analysis, right? We find the blind spots, we find the holes. We make sure that every single minute will count. If it's 1 hour, if it's 1.5 hours, we're working the entire time. I have so much access to our resources that we use that I can, even within the lesson, on a Google Drive, be like, all right, you struggle with this questions. We have an extra 15 minutes at the end. Let's look at some of these questions. Let's practice some of them. Let's find some of the hard level ones that we can practice. Real-time feedback, where we can stop mistakes as they happen and make sure that those bad habits aren't building up. I remember that I had a gym teacher in elementary school. He basically said that phrase, practice makes perfect, is a lie. Because he said, if you practice doing something wrong, you're getting good at doing something bad. So he said, perfect practice makes perfect. So we're going to do perfect practice. Teach you the right way to do it, and then you do that the right way again and again and again. Adaptive pacing, where lessons move at the student's speed. If we have more of an accelerated student, we move a little bit faster. If we have to go back and review, I've done things where I'm like, all right, let's stop, let's go back and let's just review everything from the beginning for a certain question type or certain topic. All right, it's all about making sure that we can maximize it. It's a standardized test. but there's not one standard way to do it. Depends on the student. Mental and strategy coaching, right? A lot of it's having the right mental approach. Being a coach for sports in my school, I just sent last week my softball girls before their big softball game a visualization video. I said, watch this before you go to bed. The visualization of how you see yourself succeeding, that mental part of the game is so important for sports, also for SAT, and then strict accountability. We have study schedules, weekly progress where we track what's happening and showing the growth that's occurring. And to show just some of that growth, this is a student that I worked with over the course of January, February, and then into March in preparation for the March SAT. And you can see with some of the materials that we have access to, the different types of questions that in addition to her practice tests for homework, she was answering different types of questions. And you can see how we were tracking it to make sure that one, you're doing it, we would go over and they got wrong, but we're practicing a lot of the parts of the test. And as we get towards the end, it's more of the question types that they're getting wrong that we were hitting even harder. And then this also shows some of the one-to-one program opportunity as well. We have a lot, like I said earlier, practice tests that are college board unreleased tests that you can have us helping you with and access to through our program where you can be practicing real college board questions. And again, we're tracking the growth of the students and how they're doing over the course of the time that we work together. And then again, you have just the results that speak for themselves. When you see scores like a 790, 780, high-end scores, it's a result of all that work. It's possible to do, but it's not just us working together. It's you then taking the time on your own to continue to incorporate what we talked about to make sure that you're building up that academic ability. And I think back to you for that, Julia.
I already got the feedback. The feedback say whatever Paul talked, it's not only help the SAT test, it's help the general exam strategy. Okay, it's very practical and thanks for. So I quickly go through this. We're going to go to the Q&A. As everybody know, and VSA, we do have a summer camp, and from the kindergarten to sixth grade level. I emphasize the level. It doesn't have to be sixth grade. It's the sixth grade level. Next slide. And yes, for online, I also have the vocabulary and the book club. At summer camp, we also have a book club vocabulary because during our school year, we teach grammar, reading, comprehension, and writing. So we don't have a time to teach in the vocabulary. That's why we put this vocabulary and the book writing in the summer. Next one. And also in the center, we do still open July 6th to August 14th evening time and open to the ELA and math program. Next. And in center, we also especially had the current second grade or third grade move to our DW writing program. So we have a solely 6 weeks writing program. And in online, we do have the 7 or even 8th, 9th grade students, the writing program, also exclusive writing, no grammar, no reading. The reason is multiple students took our diagnostic test. They're even in the 9th grade already, but their writing needs really a lot of help. So I feel summer is the time we can help these kids to enhance their writing program. Next slide. Our 4 semester program in center, we do have a writing, math program, and public speaking. In online, we only have a writing program. The enrollment already started. Feel free to contact me. Any questions? I do put my WeChat and my cell phone on the chat. Okay. Yes. Okay. We do have a WeChat group. Welcome to join. If you are not there, then next we open to the Q&A. You feel free to open the camera on, ask any questions, or you can chat in the chat box. It's all okay. I think one of the common question is the parents could ask us, say, oh, how long does my kids need to prepare the SAT? That's the first question. Okay, so I let me see. Oh my God. Okay, so I put it useful. Okay, my answer is depends your student's starting point, and it depends where. I think one thing Paul emphasized, even the SAT has a fourth separate domain, but the foundation is still the grammar, the vocabulary, reading, and writing. So especially the vocabulary, it's not so easy to remember a lot of your vocabulary. So I really suggest that students should start to do at least 20. Some of the program ask you to do 50, which is a lot. But you could do it, but you have to constantly review again and again. Okay. The question here is, how can a student focus on what they did learned wrong in the mock SAT test? How can they know what are missing, not just silly mistakes? And if they work with you, how would you help?
Well, I mean, I track everything. All right. I'm data driven. So knowing what kind of questions they have, that's I mean, we go through the answers and knowing that they got certain questions wrong, and I can compare it back to the previous tests, previous sessions that we had, and that's one of the most important things with the one-to-one is you get that ability to really track the individual success that a student has. And then once we know that they're struggling with a certain type of question or certain types of questions, those are the things that we bring in and then start to focus by providing supplementary materials. And we have a lot of supplementary material for that. But it's usually me going through. So if they got it wrong, I'll say, all right, this is what you picked. Why did you pick it? They explain why they picked it. We explain why their logic of why they picked it was wrong. We review the strategy. And then I want them to answer it a second time, but answer it hopefully correctly. I think rather than me just telling them what the right answer is, having them know after they review the strategy with me, having them do it themselves, it's just a better learning experience for them. They learn more if they can now learn from that mistake by seeing, all right, let me do it a second time after we review the strategy. But that's, I think, the major thing that we do as we go through those mock exams is tracking where they have those questions, reviewing the types of strategies that they could have used correctly, and then having them answer it a second time. And a lot of the times the student will get it right the second time, not just because there's one less option to go with, but because it's also being able to understand this is what I was supposed to do. And I asked that question of why did you choose it? Because I want to know what their thinking was. I want to get into their head a little bit so I can make sure that they don't make that same mistake a second time.
Yeah, I think, a lot of different strategy to teach SAT or even teach regular classes. So some places could teaching say, okay, let's do all the test prep. Then if you make a mistake for this question, I'm going to answer to you. For us, it's like, for me, I'm teaching some math in the center. So I always say, oh, you made a mistake for this question, but what is the foundation? What is the clear concept about this question? Do you understand? So we really have to go back to the root of the question. It's not to say I only tell you this question. I tell you these sets of the questions. This is the concept that you involved. Only you understand the concept that then you can solve all the sets of the questions. That's what we're focused on. Okay, next question is, before we sign up SAT class, what is the minimum requirement on the vocabulary level? How many words we need to master before we sign up SAT class?
I would say there, I don't think there is a minimum in a sense. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. The students that are at a beginning stage, the students that are at the most advanced stage, vocab is always something that is something you can work on. I know some that Julie and I have tried to stress to so many kids over the past year, especially that vocab is important. So, I mean, I don't want to say there's a minimum, but I think knowing that you should be open to trying to expand as much as possible your knowledge of vocabulary is probably the more important thing there. It's maybe not so much to be cliche where you start, but where you end, right? To know that like even if you didn't have a minimum base going in, to know that by the end you improved in terms of knowing a lot of words, but also knowing the different ways that you can break down a word, knowing prefixes, suffixes, root words, and all the strategy that you can use as well is an important part of that as well.
We have actually, I spent a Nepal, and we got the 2,000 words, which is exclusive for the SAT. We got the list. I asked the staff to make every single words, the definition, the syllabus, analogy, and all the sentences. So we made this kind of dictionary for the SAT data. Uh, yeah, we do have sets of the real test for the last few years. And the students, for us, we really want them to do more of the practice test to know the real time, using the real time to do this test. That's what we're planning. Also, I really want to say Paul does very well to tracking every student's the homework, what their scores, he does spend a lot of time that. So next question is for students who are generally good in English with good vocabulary and grammar, what is your recommendation strategy to help them to have consistently good score?
I think you need to know how they use it on the test. So being like having a good vocab base, having good grammar, it's now how do they ask those questions on the test? Because it's not just the question, it's also the variations of the question. So you have as many practice questions as you possibly can. I think that's not just like some people say, all right, one test. I think if you can complete two tests for homework, that would be good. I mean, I know it takes time, but the time is worth it in the end. Because I think the repetition is the most important part. So even if you're good at something, knowing how to use it on the test and then repeating it again and again and again, so it becomes muscle memory, becomes second nature, and so you're consistently getting it right. And then to also know that outside of just the vocab and the grammar, there's other parts to this test as well. Right? There's vocab and using it in the reading comprehension passages. And so many times kids think, all right, I'm through the vocab questions, I'm done with vocab. The most recent test that College Board put test 11 on the Blue Book app, there's the first module alone. So many words that I saw kids struggle with that they didn't know, but it wasn't in a vocab question. It was in a reading comprehension passage where it was just knowing those words would help you understand it so much better. So I think consistent practice is maybe the most important thing, just to make sure you stay at that spot where you are. But that practice is vital to the SAT. But it's not just practicing, it's knowing what you're doing right and making sure you know how you're doing it right, but also learning if you're doing it incorrectly, what you can do better to get it right as well.
What I would say, I always told the students, let's emphasize the accuracy first. Okay, so you make sure, do your best to get every single question correct. Once accuracy is really good, then you start working on your speed. So you definitely say, okay, give you enough time to double check, to reversely check, backwards check, whatever strategy to check if the answer is correct. Then you say, okay, I'm handing in, okay, to see how much you correct. Definitely get the highest accuracy first. Then you're going to speed up. Okay, so bottom line is how can you get a consistent good score? You cannot make a mistake. You know, so that's why you have to find every single question. Why do I make a mistake? Why? Then you eliminate it. If it's the same pattern, if it's you one, what I do is if you make one mistake, you're going to do the similar questions. You're going to do another 10 questions. Then you're not going to make a mistake. Okay. So, would Mr. Paul teaching vocabulary or only teaching SAT? It teaches SAT entirely, SAT and ACT, or AP history, no, SAT. Another one, what practice do you recommend? Barron, Princeton Review, anything else? You mentioned College Board resources. How to get access besides the Blue Book?
Well, I mean, College Board has their question bank that I think is important to use. I think you always want to start with that. I don't mind Princeton Review, Barron's. I just think that if you want to get the best measure, probably Blue Book is the best. And I know that they're constantly adding more to what they have in terms of what they offer. But outside of the Princeton Review, the Barron's, when we talk about limited Blue Book tests that are out there, we have at the office, we have access to the unreleased tests that we can utilize to, again, they're College Board tests. So we've got a voluminous amount of those types of tests that we can supplement with. So again, Barron's, Prince Review, I'm not knocking them at all. They're good, but sometimes I feel like they make questions that aren't quite the same way that they're asked on the actual SAT. Sometimes I've seen that some of the test prep books, which are again overall are very good, sometimes they don't give you a question that is unique to the new SAT. They just took an old SAT question from the paper test that's not even asked anymore and just made it into digital format. So I think sometimes you have to be a little bit careful with some of them and some of the questions. So if you want the truest experience, it's using the College Board materials that that we have access to and can help you with the access to that.
Do you have any suggestion for seventh grade in preparation for SAT in the future?
Yeah, reading. Reading a lot, like reading is even at a younger age, reading. I can see the impact that it's made with my kids. It's impacted me with me. I was the kid that always, granted, it was also before technology in a sense. I was born 1982. So I sat in my parents' car and asked if instead of going into the grocery store, could I sit and read? Driving 5 minutes, I had a book in my hand all the time. I think reading makes a world of difference. And then just exposing yourself to these different things at an early age. I mean, there's the PSAT stuff, right? There's the PSAT 8-9 that gets you prepped for as you progress through this. So at seventh grade, you can still work in the reading comprehension. There's close readings that you can do that will help you with those critical reading strategies to prepare you for how you can be analytical with your reading and really kind of seamlessly transition into SAT prep when you get into high school.
I totally echo with Mr. Paul and my daughter, seventh grade, actually even before 13 birthday, and she got a 7 train day that moment out of 800. So she didn't take any classes. It's because she loves reading, you know. Also, from what I see, the other students who get the higher, the score later, it's because they all year around the foundation is really good, you know. So just focus on the build the solid language foundation, including the grammar, including vocabulary and the reading comprehension and writing. So these all the language, you cannot separate them. But on the other hand, also, if she like to working on the vocabulary, start working on the vocabulary. I think that's accumulation, you know. Also, one thing I want to say is vocabulary. I always suggest to the kids, you use the index card or even you use the post-it note, stick one, put on your bedroom, put in front of your desk, every day you can see these words, then it helps.
And I think too, when you create those things, you write it down yourself as opposed to using something that's pre-prepared. When you write it down, I think there's a correlation between you actually committing it to memory a little bit better, as opposed to just using a pre-created deck of vocab words that are out there on one of those apps. If you're writing down the words, you just have a better opportunity to learn those words as you do it. I've always that worked for me as a student too. Going back to like my high school, middle school days, writing stuff down always helped me learn things better and also start to memorize a lot of that material as well.
Okay. So any questions? And especially any question for Paul? I could stay a little bit. Paul, thank you so much. Thank you thank
Thank you for
you.
having me, and
Okay,
I
thank
look forward
you.
to working with any and all of you.
Okay, thank
All right.
you.
All right. Thank you.